Have you ever wondered who writes better books, Canadians or Americans? Me neither, but you've just clicked on this video, so I hope you're curious now. These are traditional rivals. For Canada, it's like the older sibling, the sibling who don't apologise enough and have warmer weather. So really, this could be anybody for Canada. And for the US, this is the rival that they most want to beat, their current opponent. It's Canada today, but it literally could be anybody. Here are the rules. Canada and the USA both released a long list for a book award based around their national literature, the Giller Prize and the National Book Awards. And I'm going to pick 4 books from each long list, and then I'm going to put 2 books up against each other in some sort of duel. The best book will get a point for their country. The country with the most points wins this battle. Some of you will be wondering, Scott, why did you pick 4 books each? That leaves you with the chance of a tie. And that's because there are only 4 Canadian books that are easily available to me. Really, the USA have drawn first blood by having a much larger publishing industry with significantly better distribution. For the US, I've picked the books that I was most interested in. For Canada, I've picked the books that were, there. So I've decided that in the event of a tie, my favourite book from the 8 books that are going in this battle is going to be the winner. I've also decided to exclude any books I've previously read in this showdown. And I'm not going to pull any punches with this. Some of those books were amazing and some of those books were absolutely terrible. And there's literally no book in the middle. I don't know what that says about the rest of the books on the long list for both prizes. Let's meet the books in this battle. Representing the USA is Temple Folk by Aaliyah Bilal, The End of Drum Time by Hanna, Pylvainen, A Council of Dolls by Mona Susan Power, and Ponyboy by Eliot, Duncan. Representing Canada, we have Never Lived on Earth by Kasia Van Schaik, Away from the Dead by David Bergen, The Double Life of Benson by Chong, and Girlfriend on Mars by Deborah. Both these prizes do something a little bit different from other book prizes by including short story collections. I'm very unforgiving of short story collections. I just prefer the extra time and complexity that a novel brings, but I'm always happy to give them a try. So up first, we have the 2 short story collections. Round 1. Representing the USA, it's Temple Folk. Representing Canada is We Have Never Lived on Earth. Temple Folk is a collection of short stories about Black Muslim folks, tackling race, faith, family relationship. There are some really interesting ideas. There's a lot of father-daughter relationships here. A daughter is haunted by the spirit of her father in one story. A father and a daughter conspire to get each other a cheeseburger after he becomes a vegetarian. A daughter takes off her niqab after she learns of her father's infidelity. I was really excited about this book. Unfortunately, the writing is not up to it. The ending of the short stories lacks fulfillment. The characters are not distinct. I started to wonder, when did the character become a vegetarian? Only to realize that this was the second story in the collection and that it was a completely new character. There was no tension, there was no effort made to have the reader engage with the protagonist, and I'm sorry to say, but this was pretty poor. I will normally DNF a short story collection if the first story is bad, but in this one I decided to give a couple more stories a go, but it didn't get any better. And in the end, I did DNF this one. So it's time to look at Canada's first book. Now, if you're a football fan, this is a tap-in. If you're a basketball fan, this is a slam dunk. And if you're a fellow Australian, we call this a Stephen Bradbury. We Have Never Lived on Earth. A collection of short stories all focused on a single character, Charlotte, who was born in South Africa and moved to Canada with her mother and sister. There was a theme of financial divides, being in 2 places and not being sure where you belong, divorce and a missing father. But the dominant theme was the role of women in society. I enjoyed the first short story when the mother and the daughter were house cleaning for a family and they accidentally found the wife's shopping list for the husband's birthday. There were some items on that list that really didn't need to be purchased from the the shops. But each subsequent short story was weaker than the last, and I slowly started to lose interest in this collection. The protagonists didn't feel real or continuous. The stories may have been told out of order, and I just didn't have a chance to figure out how our protagonist had changed between the stories, how old they were, what was going on with their life. Follow-up stories made me feel lost, and they just didn't intersect and build upon the themes of the earlier stories. And I also ended up DNFing this one. It's not been a good start for either nation here. Having to pick the best book is hard, and I considered not giving either country a point. But by virtue of me actually liking one story in the collection, I have awarded Canada the point. So Canada 1, the USA 0. Canada might be cheering, but they're going to have to pull up their socks if they want to keep winning. And if the USA don't win this round, they'll be 2-0 down, facing an almost impossible task. Round 2. This round is the books that I thought were the safest books for me. And this time we're going to start with Canada, and their novel will be by David Bergen, Away from the Dead. It's up against The End of Drum Time, Away from the Dead. Set during the chaos of Ukraine during the Russian Revolution, Len owns a bookshop. Conscripted into the army, he runs away so that he can write poetry to his lover. Sablin is an adopted Mennonite child, and he runs away to join the anarchists, only to discover that instead of war, he loves gardening and maybe somebody else. Inna is a peasant who tries to stop a Mennonite landowner stealing her child. This book is tackling themes of love and loyalty during a time of violence and terror. Obviously there's war, but also conscription, starvation, paranoia, and just generally trying to find some human meaning in such an extreme and horrific situation. This is the perfect recipe for an amazing book, and it is with great disappointment that I have to say it is completely forgettable and entirely underwhelming. I've got to be completely honest with you. You've no doubt figured out that this is not a live reaction. This is the third of 8 books that I have read. And between reading this and the next 5 books, it's so forgettable that in writing my review, I had to check multiple times if I actually read this book. Everything I've said about it, the themes, the plot, I looked that up. I do not remember reading this book. I keep records of what I read. I know I finished it in 2 days. I know I spent about 4 hours reading it, but I don't remember a second. I have to say that this reading contest is not going well at the moment. If it doesn't pick up, I'm pretty close to being cancelled in 2 countries. And The End of Drum Time could make it 3 more because it's set in Lapland, covering Finland, Russia and Norway. Set in 1851, this is a book about the encroachment of Christianity on the Sami people. Beta suddenly converts from his traditional religion to Christianity, leaving his son Eva to tend to the reindeer herd on his own. Eva and Willa seem to be very attracted to each other, but what will she think when she sees the size of his herd? That's not a metaphor. His herd is shrinking in size and he's not very rich anymore. Beta and Eva have run up debts with an alcohol merchant who is keen to take payment. And that means even fewer reindeer. In fact, it may even mean negative reindeer. The borders between Norway, Finland and Russia are starting to be enforced, meaning that the traditional people won't be able to take the reindeer on their traditional routes between seasons. This is a book about religious colonialism, alcoholism, love, and the Sami people, the only indigenous people in Europe, apparently. This is another recipe for an amazing book, but this one did not disappoint. I have never read a novel about the Sami people before, and that was just so interesting to learn about them and their culture. It really does feel like an indigenous culture in this book, and what happens to them really does mirror the treatment of indigenous people in countries like the USA, Canada and Australia. I think it's so powerful to look at that discussion between colonialism and indigenous people, but take away all the emotions and the prejudices and the pre-held beliefs and the societal brainwashing and normality that we are left with, and just look at a country and a culture where we don't have any stakes in, where these countries are not part of our national identity. While that's powerful, I just think this is such a well-balanced book. The plot was great, the characters are so strong, and the issues were central, and each one of those aspects strengthens the other two aspects of it. It really works. Often when important issues get discussed in a novel, you sort of start to get this feeling of, yeah, okay, this is a really important issue, but why is this a novel and not an essay? It's such a pleasure to see a big, bold, important issue told through the narrative of a novel in a way that embraces characters and plot, that respects the novel. This is brilliant. This is a fantastic book, and it is the clear winner of this duel. So that levels the scores at 1-1 at the halfway point, and it's nice after 3 flops to be able to categorically recommend a well-crafted and thoroughly enjoyable piece of literature. Let's hope that trend continues in our next battle. Round 3. Representing the USA is A Council of Dolls by Mona Susan Power. Representing Canada is The Double Life of Benson Yu. A Council of Dolls follows 3 generations of Indigenous women slowly moving back in time from daughter to mother. Part of the story is told through the dolls they were carrying with them when they were children. And this is very much magical realism, and regular viewers will know that this is my least favourite thing. But I didn't really have an issue with this. The book is really about 2 things: parent-child relationships, particularly mother-daughter, and the trauma of residential schools, particularly the lasting effect and the impact that that particular childhood trauma has on adults. This book was really dark, and I thought the dolls were actually really well done. I got this a Quakey, Maisie, Sayaka Murata vibe where trauma and magical realism mesh together really effectively to demonstrate the lack of grasp with reality and sanity that these characters have. But also, these dolls, they filled the role of friend, of mother, of confidant, and most importantly, of witness. There's some really amazing writing here. On the negative side of things, this is essentially 3 stories. The first story ends, and it's such a gripping moment, and you're left with questions and assumptions, and you really want to know more. You really want to get back to it. It's really amazing writing in that first section, such a powerful story. But the next 2 sections fail to add very much to that moment. It fails to build upon the momentum, and they're not as strong as that first section. This is still a really good book, and I recommend it, but there is definitely room for improvement. And is that enough room for The Double Life of Benson Yu to gain Canada its second point in this battle? Benson Yu is a middle-aged man who writes comics for a living. He is suffering from depression and alcoholism and has quite a painful past. Trauma and memory are big themes in this magical realism come metafiction novel. Characters jump out of comic books without explanation and exist in the real world, and this is combined with sharp changes of point of view, making the storytelling really confusing. And unfortunately, Kevin Chong's writing is not up to the standard to pull off this incredibly ambitious novel, and the result is unfortunately abysmal. To be completely fair, this is a book that is either going to work for you and be amazing, or it's not going to work at all, and it's going to be pretty easy to tell. So I kind of really recommend this book for people who are really good at DNFing. So that means Council of Dolls make it 2 wins in a row for America, and they've come from behind to be 2-1 ahead. Can Canada take it to the tiebreak, or will the USA cruise to a 3-1 victory? It's the anchor leg, round 4. Representing Canada is Girlfriend on Mars by Deborah Willis, in a battle of completely different books with the USA's final novel, which is Ponyboy by Eliot Duncan. Amber is looking for meaning in her life, more so than the weed she is growing in her apartment with her agoraphobic boyfriend Kevin. She signs up for Mars Now, the latest reality TV craze. Amber Kitavan and 23 other wannabe Marsonauts compete to be the first 2 people to colonize Mars. If she wins, she can never come back. It's not a legal thing, there's just honestly no way to come back. Told from the alternating points of view of Kevin, who is watching his girlfriend on TV without contact with her, and Amber, who is competing on this reality TV show, this is a satire that is both very silly and takes aim at many of the most prevalent parts of our modern society. Prior to the whole Mars thing, Kevin and Amber really tried to avoid society, to live outside of capitalism in Canada and not be part of the rat race. As well as wondering about that whole relationship thing, Kevin is wondering why Amber decided to rejoin society. Of course, if she wins, she's going to remove herself from society in a very different way than just selling illegal hydroponic marijuana out of her flat. So much of Kevin's personality is Amber that when he meets somebody new who herself is a bit of a square peg in a round hole, Kevin begins to wonder about the ethical ideas that are counter to society. Things such as ethically sourced fish versus being a vegan. The purpose of this novel is not to ask which one of those two is better, but it's to ask, can that sort of antisocial business, that antisocial behavior really affect change, especially when they're running counter to each other? Wills is also examining our current internet and celebrity culture. Most of the contestants on Mars now are influencers just looking to gain more likes and followers. It's funded by Elon Musk and SpaceX, only she's changed the names and made him a New Zealander who is much less creepy than he really is. Willis is also examining the human need for connection, for relationship, love, and the things that we put up with for all that. This book is really saying that the world sucks and that we only put up with it so that somebody will love us. And not only is that an incredibly depressing thought, it's accurate, and that bizarrely makes it really funny. This book is intentionally really stupid, but it is quite thought-provoking too. I think that the cover really does sum up the stupidity and the satire of it all. It's a really strong book for Canada to finish with, but can it beat Ponyboy? Ponyboy is an exploration of trans masculinity and addiction with the supporting themes of identity, personal growth, friendship, love, loyalty, depression, and mental health. Set in Paris and Berlin, we follow Ponyboy and a few of his friends as they experiment with drugs and alcohol. This book has a bit of a William S. Burroughs feel to it. I could see this really being compared to something like Naked Lunch or Junkie, and being compared with one of the beats is never a compliment. Although, if there's anything that could make the beats more palatable, it would be retelling their stories with trans men as the focal points and seeing how they develop differently. Actually, I would really be down to retelling any of those authors whose works are dripping with misogyny and toxic masculinity through a trans masculine lens and seeing how it develops, not just the beats, but authors like Hemingway and Fitzgerald too. Unfortunately, this book falls down with its consistent changes in point of view and timeline. This requires strong and clear writing that Eliot Duncan simply doesn't have at their disposal. This really does feel like a book from which the author will grow from and improve their craft from. There are such cool ideas here, but the execution didn't match. To use a tennis metaphor, Duncan is hitting the ball really hard. It's just rarely landing in the court. And I ended up DNFing this book. And that means that our final scores are 2-2. And we're heading to a tiebreaker. So the country that will win this little battle will be the country with the best book of all 8 books. I think all 8 books had excellent ideas, but what really separated the books here was the execution. But I thought there was one book here that was really able to effortlessly communicate quite a complex plot, quite nuanced emotional situation and characters and complex ideas. It was a really satisfying and enjoyable novel. I think it was easily the best of the 8 books, and that book is The End of Drum Time. So the USA wins in a tiebreak. Congratulations to the United States of America. Canada, so close, but better luck next time. A bit of post-match analysis for you book fans. I think that this match may have been won by the publishing industry of the two countries. The USA has a truly world-class publishing industry that can really get books out there. And Canada, 6 books on that long list were not available to me. I'm sure that would have completely changed the starting lineup and very potentially the results of of this battle. I really enjoyed this contest. Even if the books were of mixed enjoyment, I just loved the theatre and the silliness of all of this. So I think I'm going to do this again for some different countries. I would love you to comment below which countries you would like to see me read from and review, and who you think their traditional rivals are, who you'd like to see them beat, or in the worst case scenario, be beaten by. I would like to thank my Patreons. One of the benefits my Patreons get is that they knew that I was making this video well in advance. So if you want to see what videos are coming, why not consider signing up? The link is in the description. Make sure you like this video, and if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel out. Canadians, if you're feeling bad about losing, why not click here and discover my favorite book of the year so far? It is by a Canadian author. Thank you all for watching. Bye bye.